Dr. Jeff graduated from Colorado State University School of Veterinary Medicine in 1989. He established Planned Parenthood Plus in 1990. PPP is best known for its low-cost mobile neutering services, Native American reservation work, and training of veterinarians from around the world in more efficient surgical techniques. Dr. Young has served on or consulted with numerous Humane Society boards nationally and internationally. He has founded his own nonprofit group called Planned Parenthood International. PPI was established to help fund spay neuter work and veterinary training involving numerous veterinary hospitals and veterinary schools around the world. PPI has a well-established international training center in Playa del Carmen, Mexico, offering free training to qualified candidates and having had hundreds of veterinarians and veterinary students come for hands-on training. There's also a new training center in Conifer, Colorado. Dr. Jeff is most proud of having personally sterilized over 185,000 animals in the last 32 years. And he is an outspoken proponent of early age neutering for companion animal population control. Dr. Young has the #1 ranked TV show on Animal Planet, Dr. Jeff Rocky Mountain Vet. He has used this platform to promote population control and basic medical needs for all companion animals. Dr. Young is driven by a simple underlying mission to significantly reduce companion animal overpopulation and suffering throughout the world. His motto, think globally, act locally. And before we go over to Dr. Jeff's presentation, I'm going to hand it over to Bree, who's going to run a quick poll question for the group.
Thank you, Stacy. All right, so to kick things off, we have one poll question for you. I'm launching it. This is your interactive portion of the presentation. So before we get started, we want to know, what is the ideal age for cats and dogs to be spayed or neutered? Is it any time? Just go ahead and do it. 0 to 8 weeks, 8 weeks to 5 months, 6+ months, or over 1 year. Go ahead and get those votes in. Oh, I'm loving what I'm seeing. All right, couple more seconds here. We're gonna close it out. We got 3, 2, 1, and we're closing. All right, let's go ahead and share those results. All right, so there's no moss growing on you guys. You guys are hip, you're with it. Between 8 weeks and 5 months is the overwhelmingly popular answer with 98% of you. And then we have 2% of folks saying 6+ months. And so here to talk more about all of that is Dr. Jeff. So I'll turn things over to him.
All right, this is the 5 freedoms, very well known internationally. In America, we don't talk much about this, but you know, my idea of shelters is, the goal is to put ourselves out of business, or you know, be around to help in like bad weather conditions and things like that. Not a place to warehouse animals for extended period of time. And understand, when I graduated in 1989, we were killing, you know, 24 million animals, somewhere around there, 24, 26 million animals, dogs and cats a year. And we're down, depending on who you want to read, anywhere from 1 million to 4 million now. It's kind of ticked back up after COVID. But in all honesty, it was spay neuter that really brought those numbers down. Cats are 45 times more prolific than humans. Dogs are 15 times more prolific than humans. So it doesn't take them very long, if we put our guard down in terms of spay neuter, that the population starts booming again. These are my spay neuter gurus, and Dr. Phil Bushby, Amy Burling, and Lisa Howe. They do a lot of research, so I do use a lot of their information. So the question becomes, you know, what's the ideal age? Doing prepubertal animals, in the past, prepubertal was considered kind of, you know, like a year and under, 6 months and under, and now I consider it 4 months and under at this point. But it's a tool, you know. In most humane societies, the average animal age going into humane society is 18 months. So it's not like we, you know, overburdened with puppies all the time. But the question does become, do we spay and neuter everything prior to adoption? And I absolutely believe that any humane society should be doing that. It becomes very imperative. We know that spay neuter contracts are anywhere from 30 to 60% effective. And once again, because dogs and cats reproduce so fast, it just doesn't take very long to be shooting yourself in the foot. The first year they had a free spay neuter thing out of the shelter down in Pueblo, Colorado, they got a 30% return rate. And you could go to almost any vet in the county for free. and yet they still only got a 30% return rate for spay neuter. So those are the things we got to keep in mind. In Colorado, you cannot adopt an animal before 8 weeks of age. A lot of states are that way. So, we do have that window from 5 to 8 weeks that we can get them dewormed and spay neuter. When we do road stuff, if I go to reservations, I may be there once a year, twice a year. We'll do animals 5 to 8 weeks as a matter of routine. And in all honesty, we have fewer complications, and these animals do just fine. So spay neuter for cats has kind of been accepted by 5 months. Spay neuter for dogs is still controversial, and it does kind of depend on the breed to some degree, and we're going to go through some of this, but it's a lot of it's still up in the air. What we do know is that spay neuter animals live longer and are healthier, and there's no debate about that whatsoever. So let's see, we'll go on to the next. The veterinary profession, for years, it has used 6 months to 12 months kind of as the standard. There's no science behind that. And I'll be honest, our anesthetics were really bad, even 40 years ago. So anesthesia has changed dramatically. So it's a much safer procedure. And I just think, more people are open to getting animals fixed at a little bit earlier age. Some of the studies, we use correlation versus causation. And the example I'll give is the sale of ice cream goes up in New York City, the murder rate goes up. So do you stop the sale of ice cream? That's a correlation. It's not a causation. People that do yoga are less likely to have diabetes. Those are correlations and not causation. And unfortunately, in science, we've gotten to where we do a lot of correlation. If this happens, then this must be connected to it. And it's just not true. We do what they call retrospective studies, which you usually do a survey and you're looking back in time. And most of those are done at universities. And if you think about it, universities have a very skewed population because they tend to be a little bit more expensive, and they tend to get animals that many veterinarians refer because they're real problems. So it's really different than a prospective study where you basically follow an animal from birth all the way through, through its life, and you try to look at all the variables. And it's really hard to look at all the variables in life. But we can do certain things a little bit better. What we do know in America, there are millions of pets living in lower income areas. 87% or 77% never see a vet in their life. 87% are not fixed. So they're a real source of puppies in the future and kittens. We do know a lot of kittens nowadays are coming from feral colonies because we have so many people actively trapping ferals, and that's great. And we're getting them spayed or neutered, but the kittens, that really trap young end up at shelters to be adopted, as they should be, versus being put back out if they're young enough to tame down. But a large number of our animals, our cats in particular, are coming from feral colonies. We also know in the last 3 decades that the veterinary profession sees a smaller number of animals than we've ever seen. Now the animals we're seeing get some of the best care in the world, without a doubt. But yet, we've just dropped off, and that's due to finances. It's economics is a real big issue. And economic euthanasia is a real concern for me as a veterinarian. I just see too many animals that are quoted, $5,000, $10,000 quotes for things, and people just don't have that kind of money. So it's definitely an issue. I would say if you get a chance, you should check out Bob Christensen's, his put out by the Boca Foundation. Bob Christensen wrote the book Save Our Strays, but he also did a study, and it's called Is the Veterinary Profession Serving All Companion Animals' Medical Needs in America Today? And the answer is no, we're not. He came to the conclusion about 40% of Americans can truly afford current medical prices, and I tend to believe that given some of the prices I've been seeing. But the cost is still the #1 reason for not getting an animal fixed. So keep that in mind. It does come back to money sometimes. Here's some realities for me. Some places as high as 60% of puppies that are adopted are given away within a calendar year. Now understand, most people, only about 25, 30% get animals from shelters. You're more likely to get your animal from a friend, someone a relative that had a litter in the backyard. So that's an issue. Humane societies, let's say, provide 20, 25, 30% of animals that are in households. But in there, dogs are 15 times, cats 45 times more prolific than humans. So once again, they can reproduce really, really fast. We know in households today, is over 90% of cats are fixed and over 80% of dogs are fixed. So you think, well, how if all those are fixed, it can't be that much of a problem. But those are in households where they're taken care of. It doesn't necessarily mean some of the poorer areas where dogs are more like not necessarily part of the household, they're more outside, they're kind of semi-feral. And plus, many of these animals produce one litter. Let's face it, how many times have you heard, I got my cat, she came to my front porch and then she had a litter, and I have 4 kittens now. I mean, it's really not that hard to get a cat just by opening your door and say kitty, 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 because we still have a tremendous overpopulation problem out there. So, I still think, we're kind of behind in the States in terms of shelters, in that we don't tend to have, we don't have necessarily veterinarians on staff, trainers on staff, behavior people on staff. And in Europe, they have a lot of those things, certainly in the UK, because what we do know is 50% of the problems with dogs going into shelters is behavioral. So those animals now, and once again, a large number are not fixed. Something like 80% are not fixed. So by fixing them, we can solve some of those problems, but we have to be able to offer those things. And right now, there's such a shortage of vets. We can't always do everything we want, but we definitely need to do more with training for sure. And this is definitely a little bit more dog oriented, simply because that's where the controversy is. I mean, there's still going to be vets pushing back in terms of fixed by 5 for felines, but the AVMA has accepted it. Most state organizations have accepted it. So we've come a long way with cats, and that's really important. So intact dogs are 3 times more likely, and cats 4 times more likely to end up in shelters. So that becomes, kind of interesting. 40% of dog litters are unplanned. 90% of cat litters are unplanned. Cats can just pretty much look out the window and get pregnant. So that, once again, they're 45 times more prolific than humans. So it's really important that we get those cats fixed before 5 months of age, because at 5 months, they can get pregnant. Spay neuter has some concerns, and these have been talked about. If you go back, the reality of it is, for the last 40 years, spay neuter has been pushed throughout America, and we've done a tremendous job. Once again, we're not killing 20 million extra dogs and cats a year. That's significant, and I can't say that's because of the AVMA. My profession has been really good at educating people. I can't say because shelters have done a really good job of educating people. I think society just in general is more sophisticated and more open to it. And quite frankly, intact animals are a real pain, So I think the availability of low-cost spay neuter has helped tremendously with this, and there's been lots of people get into that. Now, that's kind of gone down a little bit, and that's once again due to kind of a shortage of people in our profession. But we'll go over some of these things, especially with dogs. And it's UC Davis is the one producing most of the literature. I'm pretty sure a lot of that's paid for by the AKC. So you always got to follow the money when you look at research. This is important. Banfield 2013 study is the largest study ever done. 2.2 million dogs, 460,000 cats, and this is the conclusion they came to. And they don't have a dog in the fight. They just collect the data. Once again, it's a retrospective study, but it's a huge retrospective study. And fixed feline dogs live 23% longer, cats 39% longer, male dogs 18% longer, male cats 62% longer. Every longevity study ever done, even the UC Davis one, it says that fixed animals live longer and they're healthier. So now, if you live longer, let's say you live 1 to 3 years longer as a dog and 3 to 5 years longer as a cat. Okay, if 1 year, 7 years, let's say it's 20 extra years of life that you just gave your dog, which is 3 years in reality, but equivalent to like 20 years on the human side. Well, if you're 60 versus 80, what's the chance of getting cancer between 60 and 80 versus 40 and 60? So there's no question that cancer, we see a little bit higher cancer rates, but these animals are living longer. So that's to be expected. There's several studies here by Lisa Howe, Spain, the Spain study. All these, basically are positive. And the UC Davis, the Golden Retriever, Lab versus Golden, the German Shepherd, immune disorder, these are all pretty negative studies, but they're also very, very limited. And even the authors of the study admit they're very limited. So it does get to be how you interpret this. And it's only really been in the last, 10 to 15 years we've started seeing pushback for spay neuter. And I really do think a lot of this is generated by, because of money that's involved in selling puppies and kittens and things like that. So here, I'm just going to go some of this, and this is the science of it, and it gets to be kind of confusing. But just as an example, like hemangiosarcoma, if you know anything about Goldens, you know Goldens get hemangiosarcoma. And here, if you look at this, just the Goldens fixed, if they're fixed greater than 12 months in females, their chance of getting hemangio is 7.4%. And national, across the average, all canine tumors, it represents 2%. But if you spay them under 12 months, it's only 1.8%. If they're intact, it's 1.6, which statistically is not really significant. But you think about that. So this is saying you should spay the females less than 12 months, but the males, there's no difference, so it doesn't matter. And this is what we see with a lot of the data out of UC Davis. It's quite confusing. If you go down to osteosarc, we know Rotties are really prone for osteosarc. And that's been, my first question has always been the same. If you have a specific breed that has a much higher rate of a certain cancer, that has to be genetically linked to that breed. Rottweilers are definitely one of those with osteosarc, without a doubt. Intact is only 8%, less than 12 months. If it is, in this study, it was fixed under 12 months. The females are 28% and versus 25% in males. That's a huge jump. That's 3-4 times. But age at time of death was greater in the fixed animals. So once again, how does that affect it? So if they're 2-3 years older, is that, they don't really take that into account. And if you look at the other animals like Goldens, Labs, Visa, which are prone for some of these, they had no increased risk with osteosarc, fixed or intact. So it gets to be very confusing. And unfortunately, what happens, one study does not make science, and I can't emphasize that enough. Something will come out like this, and some practitioner will read it and say, well, I can't spay, less than 12 months because you're more likely to get osteosarcoma. Well, they don't tell you your dog's going to live to be 3 years older too, So there's a lot of controversy with this kind of stuff, and say it's not really good science. Here's another example. Goldens pop up a lot in this, if you notice, because Goldens get about everything in the world. And I have a Golden and I love Goldens. But if you look at some of these, Goldens fixed for lymphoma, less than 12 months. For the males, you get 9.6%. If they're greater than 12 months, it's 0. Intact's 3.5. So this would say at least you should, neuter them greater than 12 months. So that, there's still, with females, there's no difference at all. So these get to be, it gets to be really hard to address this. And I think some of these things can be addressed with individual doctors if they truly understand the literature, especially with some of the, with the ACL and hip issues, for the giant breed dogs. And there may be a rationale to hold off on spaying some of these giant breed dogs. But once again, my personal feeling is anything coming to the shelter should be fixed prior to adoption. And there's just, and to me, that's not controversial at all. Mast cell tumors, Goldens fixed less than 12 months, only 2.3% of females get it, but if they're done greater than 12 months, 5.7%. So that's a difference. No difference in the males whatsoever. So it's very. If you look at this, you just want to kind of pull your hair out because you really don't know which way to go with some of these things. Orthopedic conditions are probably the biggest thing I see consistently that's pushed back on more than the cancers, because there's so many, pyometras. 25% of older dogs will get pyometria, older female dogs will get pyometria. So that's significant. 20-25% of older female dogs will get breast cancer. That's significant. And you can have 20% of those animals that get breast cancer, 20% of those animals that get pyometria are going to die from them. So you can really rationalize that you can extend the life by spay neuter. And I really do believe it. I think it saves more lives than it harms. With orthopedic conditions, body condition score seems to be the biggest factor. We live in a world of obesity, and we make our dogs obese. So it's not surprising that they blow their ACLs, their CCLs at all, because they're obese, and then we throw balls for them or make them, run or go hikes with us. And I've always had fixed animals, and have had fixed animals at very young ages. and my animals are not obese. I feed them right, I exercise them right. So this becomes, once again, an educational thing. Orthopedic conditions go with being obese, without a doubt, and that seems to be one of the biggest factors. For hip dysplasia, it's interesting, you know, if you really look at the literature, and it says this down below, but litters with a high free-weaning mortality are 2 times more likely to develop hip dysplasia. And house on slippery floors. You know, if you have hardwood floors and your dog slips on those, you're 1.6 times more likely to develop a hip issue. You know, and the question does become, when do we x-ray these things? We fix these animals a lot of times at a pretty early age, under a year of age, but you don't do OFA, you don't do hip shots usually till 18 months or 2 years. So if they have an underlying problem, we don't even know it half the time when we're spaying and neutering them. And so 6 months later, we say, oh, you know, we take an x-ray for whatever reason, or the dog's a little bit lame, and we say, oh, it has a hip problem, maybe because we fixed it 6 months ago. No, probably always had it to begin with, you know. And we just don't have those kind of studies where they're x-raying before and then 6 months later to see if there's changes. So there's a lot of holes in the data for sure. This is a really important study, and I use this all the time when I go around the world talking to government people. Andrew Yokes, who does not have a dog in a fight, he basically was getting a degree in epidemiology, if I remember right, from Ohio State University, and he went to India, and he basically was looking at 3 cities. ABC means animal birth control. One animal birth control, Jaipur, since 1994, one was since 2004, and the last one had no animal birth control. So these cities were pretty much the same size, pretty close geographically. So, you know, the temperatures and things, the conditions around them were not that much different. There's no question that can affect some of these things. But it looked at, you know, 7 things: body condition, fleas, fight wounds, canine parvo virus, Ehrlichia, lepto, and infectious canine hepatitis. And what they found consistently, you know, and this was, you know, hundreds of animals they looked at, and he had the question, because he's not a veterinarian. He says, how's it possible that just spaying and neutering and vaccinating for rabies, not giving them canine parvo, not giving them, you know, vaccinating for infectious canine hepatitis, the animals were just healthier? They were best in all conditions. In the city, they had an active spay neuter program, and they vaccinated for rabies and nothing else. You know, and you kind of scratch your head, but it makes perfectly good sense, having been to many third world countries and follow animals around all day, darting them and catching them in nets and, you know, spaying, neuter them or whatever. What you find is that the fixed animals tend not to roam as much. You know, the unfixed animals, let's face it, a male dog is going to go a pretty good distance to hook up with a female dog, and he can smell her in heat, and he's going to be climbing walls and trying to get to her. And what we find is that as we fix these animals, they just get healthier. It takes about 3 to 5 years to see street animals really improve a lot with the spay neuter program. But there's no question that we can do that. And I say this becomes real important for me when I'm working in small villages and stuff in Mexico, because we can go to the government and say, this is what we can do. We can make these animals healthier, which makes people healthier. And we also find that we have a drop in bite statistics for humans, which is pretty significant. And unfortunately, a lot of places don't keep track of that. But to me, that's a really big indicator of what you're doing is right. Dr. Bushby, who is my hero and big spay neuter guru, and, you know, has a lot more credentials than I have. You know, these are some of the conclusions. Sterilized dogs and cats live longer, no doubt about it. 3 to 5 years for cats, 1 to 3 for dogs. So, and older animals are more likely to get cancer. That's the reality of life. Sterilized dogs have a higher incidence of certain cancers, you know, and that may or may not be true. We're still kind of scratching our head. But, you know, once again, because they live longer, so we expect certain cancers to be higher. Sterilized dogs have lower incidence of other cancers, and that's true. Sterilized dogs may have higher incidence of some immune diseases, and that's definitely open to discussion. Intacts are more likely to die of infections and trauma. We know something like 80% of dogs that are hit by car are intact dogs, which is kind of a crazy statistic. They did a study in Denver, Colorado, where they're looking at intact cats outside, and the average male intact cat lived 18 months. Think about that, 18 months. And cats can live to be what, 13, 14, 15, easily. So just by neutering them and throwing them back outside, you usually get them to live anywhere from 5 to 7 years, so depending on how well the tonal is taken care of. In some breeds, sterilized dogs appear to have a greater incidence of certain orthopedic conditions, and that usually goes for more of the giant breeds. But once again, if you think of hip dysplasia, who do you think of? German Shepherds, Golden Retrievers, Labradors. So we've bred a lot of this stuff in, and I think one of the problems with breeding in general is that when you breed an animal, it's to enhance the quality of the breed, not take away. And then you have too many, one-time breeders or backyard breeders. Quite frankly, it's real easy to get AKC registration, whether your dog bred with a certain dog or not. It's kind of irrelevant because you can say anything and money's involved. So all that has to be taken with a grain of salt. For me, these are the most important things. I really think all humane organizations, I've always said warehousing is not the answer, and we have gotten into kind of a no-kill movement, and we're moving a lot of diseases around because we're transporting animals. But, I just took over Humane Society up here in Conifer, Colorado, and we've been getting animals from down south near the Colorado border, and there's reservations down there, and we've been getting animals for 20 years, just transporting them up anywhere from 10, 12, 15, 20 at a time. And my first question is, well, is that ever going to end? I have no problem bringing those animals up and give them a chance. We adopt them and we spay neuter everything. But, my first thing to some of the people working there was like, we need to reach out, start going down there and doing spay neuter there, because it never ends. And there's just a tremendous push to move animals from the south, the deep south, up to the east coast for adoptions. We have a huge number of animals coming to Colorado from Texas, bringing diseases, and we don't always do a good job of making sure they're healthy before we move them. We've seen parvo outbreaks and distemper outbreaks, and it's being spread around the state. So these things are not without consequences. And in the end, the answer is not to move animals. It's to go down and spay neuter to stop them from being born to begin with. And I'll always believe that. I think it's real important as a humane organization, a 501c3, we should ensure that no animal will ever reproduce. That has to be basic for all of us. I think it's real important to have an educational campaign. What we know statistically in places like California, where they've looked at this, if a nonprofit comes in and offers low-cost spay neuter, sometimes local vets get a little mad, but in the end, what we know is that the local vets will increase in the number of spay neuters they do, simply because the educational campaign of spay and neuter makes people aware. And, not everybody wants to go to a local spay neuter. They're going to take their animal to the local vet. So we know that if nonprofits get into spay neuter and do some public education, that local vets will benefit from that. And that's a positive thing. I think we do have to look to behavior modification and training. We don't do near enough of that for dogs. Cats, a lot of times the behavioral problems have to do with the food. We know that most of the cats peeing around the house that have urinary tract infections or crystals, it's a genetic and diet thing. Plain and simple, genetics and diet. We can't change the genetics, but we can change the diet. And unfortunately, a lot of the foods on the market that people buy, the little ladies in tennis shoes that feed cats outside, they buy high ash foods, and these things cause crystals, and they get obstructions and they die. I can't think of a worse way to die than have an obstructed bladder that ruptures and die a slow, miserable death. But it's a small percentage of cats that get this, but there is a percentage that get it, and they will die from it. So this is just genetics and diet. So it's an easy thing to overcome by giving the right type of food to them. I never have believed that euthanasia should be the cornerstone of overpopulation control. And I've always believed that spay neuters is the answer. If they don't exist, we don't have to kill them. They don't have to die. They don't have to be put in homes. they don't have to have miserable lives. So, and we're never going to spay, I get asked all the time, what happens if you spay neuter them all? Nobody will have pets. It's just not reality. And what we can do is ensure that everything, at least passing through the humane organizations, are fixed and are healthy and are going to have long lives with the people who adopt them. I think you have to have a spay neuter program. I think with cats, because cats are so prolific in nature, it's absolutely imperative that every humane organization has a feral stray cat program. And that just becomes, tremendously important. And there's more and more funds available for that. It's been rough in the past. Let's face it, cats are the redheaded stepchild of the animal world, and they're the #1 animal to be abused, usually by young males. But in the end, feral cats just reproduce so fast. It's real important that we do get to them, and we have targeted programs. I think it's real important to have targeted outreach programs, and that we do as a profession. I really think we do a really poor job of educating people, and I really think we need to put a lot more emphasis on education, to make sure people understand why we're asking them to fix their animal, and what are the benefits. So my recommendations, there's no issue with cats, and I just and when we say fixed by 5, to me that's 5 weeks to 5 months. When we're on the road, we spay and neuter pretty much everything that we can get our hands on if it has an active heart rate. So, but we're only going to be there maybe once a year, so it's important that you get as many animals as we can, so we don't have a big, huge problem the next year. We know, statistically speaking, it takes about 3 to 5 years to really see, a population's drop on any given area or get any given town, especially if they have street dogs, things like that. But it doesn't happen overnight, and we do know that after 3 to 5 years, many of those animals are just much healthier. At Progreso in Mexico, when we first started there, every dog was covered in ticks and fleas. And after about 3 or 4 years, the one thing I noticed is that we still had quite a few dogs coming in, but they didn't have the ticks and fleas. They just very few of them had it. So those are the kind of things you see that are different. I think it's real important that all humane organizations have 100% of companion animals fixed prior to adoption. I've always believed that. I think, there's no controversy about small and medium breed dogs fixed by 5. Where do you cut that off? I usually cut it off, 65, 75 pounds. There may be some rationale for hip and knee issues for some of the giant breed dogs like Great Danes to wait to 8 to 18 months, a little bit older. But once again, the science is just not out on it. It's hard to take all these things into account, like what kind of floors are they on, what kind of nutrition are they on. But if I had a client, I would have no problem, a responsible client. But if obviously I'm going into an area doing street dogs, which you don't have a lot of street dogs over 65 pounds, I don't think twice about fixing them at a younger age. If I had a client with a relationship, I can say it's definitely okay, because I know their dog's not going to be out running loose and breeding, randomly. So it comes back to the individual discretion of the veterinarian and the person they're working with. Excuse me, sorry. So started with the 5 freedoms, and this is really important for us in America to know at least. I do think, I'm kind of anti no kill, and I think there's things far worse than death. Once again, I don't believe in euthanasia of healthy animals that have a chance for adoption. But I also, the funds are limited, so I do think spay, neuter, and economic euthanasia. I think more and more shelters, quite frankly, especially the big organization, need to have full service hospitals. Spay, neuter, it has to be the basis of everything we do. But with the price of veterinary medicine, too many animals are giving up a shelter simply because they can't afford to have the knee fixed. Let's say the dog goes out and gets hit by a car or something, and they're getting a $5,000 or $10,000 quote, which is very common in Colorado. It's easier to give that animal up and go get a new one. And I understand why if you're a single mom or an elderly person on a fixed income. So my whole practice is geared towards helping people like that. But we need more shelters, more nonprofits doing full service work with the emphasis on spay, neuter above and beyond everything else. This is up on the reservation in Montana, working through the Montana Spay Neuter Task Force, and as you can see, puppies, pretty much any age that we'll get them done. so we don't have to worry about a lot more litters the next year, and I get them vaccinated. This is probably the smallest kitten I've ever done. It's so not very big kitten, did just fine, you know, no issue there. And I'll leave you with this, you know, if you met my relatives, you know I say neuter your pets and weird friends and relatives. But you know, they can't read and write, but they can sure multiply. And I can't emphasize that enough. Cats 45 times more prolific than humans, dogs 15 times. So it doesn't take very long. It doesn't, you know, take very many months to ignore a problem for that problem to be a lot bigger than we had just earlier. So it's something we can't let our guard down on. There's been pushback for spay neuter, mostly on the dog side. But in the end, I think, you know, the humane organizations, and I'm seeing too many so-called humane organizations that have 501c3 that just basically transport puppies and they don't get them fixed, you know, and I don't know if they don't have a vet, but, you know, I actually talk to them at events and they say, well, we don't really believe in that. We want to get them fixed when they're older, you know, but in the end, it just doesn't work. You know, they're contributing to the problem, and you're either part of the problem or you're part of the solution. And I'd rather be part of the solution. And that's all for me. If you have questions, I guess I'm here to answer them.
Awesome. We do have some questions. That was a fantastic presentation. And there may be a few questions that we might need to circle back with you on them. But so this is a two-part question. Do you offer online conferences? This person is in the northeast part of Mexico. They're having trouble getting vets to understand the importance of doing TNR procedures. How do you do it in a better way? Most vets don't want to do an ear tip and vaccinate the feral cats when they get spayed. And they also mentioned something about also holding the cats, requiring that the cats be held for 10 days after surgery. And they think of ear tipping as mutilation.
Yeah, I haven't seen that in Mexico, and I've worked all over Mexico. And I would say when you need to reach out to Spay Mexico, depending on where you're at. And I know several different groups, so certainly you can Facebook me or email me at the DR Neuter. It's on there, hotmail.com, and I can probably hook you up with some people. I have to find people in your area. But we have Spay Mexico, and we have very, very good vets. And I mean, they're some of the best spay neuter vets in the world. They do cats in 5 minutes, cat spays all the time, and their incisions are, you know, a couple millimeters. It's just insane. So we do have good people and good data down in Mexico. So it'd just be a matter of hooking it up with the right people.
All right, excellent. Question on one of your earlier slides saying that 90% of cats and 80% of dogs fixed from households, I guess, are those you know, that we have of owned cats, right? 90% of owned cats, yeah. 80% of dogs that are fixed from owned households. Are those surveys that are done at vet hospitals? Because you also said earlier too, something in low income areas, the percentage of spayed and neutered pets is significantly lower, correct?
Right. Yeah. This is across the board, and I think, I don't know if that was an AVMH study. There's different groups that put out stuff every few years that have stats in them, and I don't remember where I got that one, to be honest with you. But yeah, I mean, we have a very, very high spay neuter rate in this country for the most part. You know, people are open to it, but it doesn't. Once again, if you have 20% having a litter prior to being spayed or neutered, those animals still have to be dealt with. So, you know, the literature's out there, and you know, you can probably Google that and something will come up. But overall, most of the animals that come through my facility are fixed. Having said that, the emergency type stuff I do, the hit by car, sometimes it's you know, they've eaten something stupid. You know, a lot of times those will be intact animals, and you know, some people get mad and they don't want to fix their animal and they leave, but they have no money, so they end up coming back. You know, and it does. I mean, we kind of have them as hostages in some sense, you know, because we don't do the work if they're not going to agree to fix them, because there's too many other people that want the help, you know. So that can be a little controversial in and of itself. We were the first for-profit clinic to require all animals to be spayed or neutered. Now, having said that, I have 130,000 clients, so we must be doing something right. we don't charge extra for that. If we're doing a surgery anyway, we throw in the spay neuter, so they're not paying extra, and I think a lot of people appreciate that. The number one reason for not getting animal spayed or neutered truly is financial, and that's the biggest thing right there.
Yeah, for sure. And we've talked a lot, at least over at the Community Cats podcast, a lot about targeting our efforts. And so you were talking about low-income communities. There's different other metrics out there. There's the popular social vulnerability index out there now. And instead of spending a month and a half trying to determine where your resources are best spent, if you're going to start sort of, what is it? You take little bites out of the elephant rather than thinking about the elephant at one time.
Yeah.
If we're sort of looking at those targeted areas as your first sort of attack point, you could use low income, you could use social vulnerability. Those would probably be pretty fair predictors, along with they run parallel with probably like the highest intake zones, depending on the Humane Society statistics. That may not be a very accurate representation anymore because of limited admission and that kind of stuff. So I mean, I'd go back to the social vulnerability or by income or some other metrics out there. But putting your resources, understanding there's limited resources. If you're going to start an initiative, say you were brand new to Colorado today, and what would your strategy be?
Yeah, I think you talk to the local humane organizations. I was an animal control officer for Larimer County Humane Society, and it didn't take me very long to figure out where 75-80% of our problems came from. It was always the same area I was getting called out to, and I remember, like, I would take animals back intact, usually running loose, take them back to the owner, and give them a warning. And then I realized it's the same animal I'm doing over and over, and the warnings don't do it. So then I would keep the animal, impound it, and give them a ticket. And then what I found is that a lot of people would not want to have animals at that point because it was not cost effective for them, or they decided to get their animal fixed so they wouldn't be roaming as much. And so I think working with local humane organizations, and there's always the crazy cat lady that you can talk to. People know. I mean, the point is, blocks, areas have people that know about animals. You go into a trailer park, there's going to be someone in there that's feeding cats that's going to know. So I think those are the kind of things, that you reach out. We do a lot of going out to small communities, and it's not like they have dogs and cats running loose, but they keep them locked up. They do the best they can, but they just come out of the woodwork when they're out there to do spay neuter. We'll get 75 to 125 animals a day in a very small community. So you're there a couple of days, you do 200, 300 animals. It's significant, because there's maybe only a few thousand people in the whole town. You wonder where all these animals are coming from, but farmers will bring in, ranchers will bring in animals. It's an opportunity. I hate to say it, as humans, we can be kind of lazy. And quite frankly, I've always believed you have to go to the problem areas. You have to go to the people. They're not going to come to you. And if they do come to you, maybe they've already had a litter, it's just, there's always that delay. It's not like they don't have good intentions, but good intentions and a quarter will get you a cup of coffee somewhere in the world, maybe.
Right. Well, and then also, going to them, and I understand you go in, you're there for a few days and then you leave, but also trying to create some sort of culture that's going to stay with the community.
Absolutely.
And making friends that then know they can use you as a supportive resource, but then there's something that's going to stick in the community too.
No, and we see it. We get a lot of extra things, like people who drive, literally we go out 3 or 4 hours and do our spay neuter work, and then for the next month or so, we'll see animals from that general area for other things, because they want to get taken care of. And what we know statistically, once again, if people invest in a spay neuter in an animal, they're more likely to invest money later on in that animal's life, simply because they, the bond's different. They've made an investment in it already, and they tend to follow up with that. So everything beneficial to the animal in the long run.
I agree with you 100%. Back in 2008, 2009 in Massachusetts, a whole group of organizations just really hit the road running with affordable spay neuter for owned cats. They just was like anybody who wanted to get a cat spayed with, free roaming cats as well as owned cats. It was just like 4 paws on the ground. We're going to just fix it. Right. Yeah. And so we just kind of went crazy with that. But it was this one focused package. We didn't think about like dentals. We didn't think about, other renal failure, other issues or whatever. And then, come around pandemic time, a little bit earlier than that, people started calling our spay neuter clinics and saying, my cat's gumming at its mouth, and
Right.
so,
Yeah.
and we were like, oh, it's coming back to us because we made that commitment to spay neuter that cat, and the door did not close. It didn't end there. We were that primary vet for that cat, but we didn't have the program in place because we were just focused on the spay neuter. And so now we're like, oh, there's like a PS to this story. So the question now is, we did such a great job with just focusing on spay neuter, keeping it super simple, focusing on it. And then we've got this. How can we do both when we are so limited with our staffing resources?
Right. No, and that's been the staffing issue has been a real issue. And I think, once again, I think we're kind of turning the corner on that to some degree, I hope. But in the end, you're absolutely right. And I've always believed, and I started out just doing spay neuter. And then at some point we're like, oh, these are really bad teeth. Maybe we should pull a tooth or two, And oh, there's an abscess there. Okay, well, we'll drain the abscess and give it a penicillin shot, and hopefully that takes care of it. So we basically just did spay neuter, but every year we kind of started adding things on. Before long, we're doing knee surgeries and heart surgeries and explorers and everything else. But we still require the spay neuter, and we have our spay neuter day every Wednesday of the other month. And then anything that comes in on the other days, we still spay neuter. We have a few every day. But I do believe that we can't just have spay neuter clinics. If we really look at the longevity and want these animals to be healthy and stay in homes, then we have to have other services, because right now, once again, in Colorado, I'm seeing $10,000, $20,000 quotes for explorers, and I don't know if that means the doctor doesn't want to do them. Or they don't know how to do them. I don't know where some of these quotes come from, but it's amazing to me. We did something the other day for $600 or $800 that they had been quoted $8,000 for. And that animal would have been put to sleep if we weren't there. That's the point, And yet we have big humane organizations along the Front Range of Colorado that do a little bit of spay neuter, a few other things, but they just, they don't have a full service hospital that's operational 7 days a week, and they should. They have the money in the bank, they're sitting on millions of dollars. We struggle as a nonprofit, but we don't turn anything away. It's pretty rare we can't do something.
Yeah, that exact same situation happened with the clinic that I'm involved with down in Georgia 2 weeks ago, and it was a $10,000 quote, and the people were given the choice to euthanize otherwise, and they ended up going to the clinic that I'm involved with, and they did a procedure for $800, and so tears all over the place. At least the upshot is that as a veterinarian, you're able to do something. You're able to help that animal. You don't have to euthanize that animal because of economic euthanasia. And I think that is taking a huge toll on the veterinary community. We were just talking a bit about staffing, and you think there might be some veterinarians now that are looking at practices and saying, what is your moral compass? And maybe thinking about who they work for. You are seeing a little bit of that happening?
Yeah, I think there's a real pushback against corporate America, and if you think about it, I'm all for competition, and I understand, and I believe in free enterprise, but, the veterinarians rarely go out of business. Even the worst veterinarians don't go out of business. That's the reality. And somewhere along the line, in the late 90s, early 2000s, corporate America looked at, said, hey, these guys are really good risk, we can get involved. And, there's like 20 different groups buying up practices in Colorado. And because there's a shortage of vets, which has nothing to do with Wall Street, it just happens to be a perfect storm. And with COVID and everything else, a lot of vets retired, different things. We had one vet die on us. So, these things were happening. But, when you bring in corporate America, well, obviously you have a board of directors and you have shareholders. So they have to get paid. They want money back. So if you're investing in a multi-million-dollar clinic, how do you get the extra money? You have to raise your prices. It really is that simple, and they do this kind of computer textbook stuff where you have to do this test and then this test and this test. And it makes sense, but there's no practice of medicine at that point. You just throw darts at a board until you get the answer. You run all these tests, and that's how they make the money. you know, and you're not allowed to take shortcuts. You're not allowed to use your brain and figure something out. You know, that's not the way we do business, because there's not enough money in it. You know, and that's really had a profound effect on our profession, in all honesty. Plus, I think state boards have gotten to the point where we're the only profession where the state board doesn't give you, you know, like, what is bottom line here, you know, in terms of setting a standard. What is the standard? They start setting the standard from the top. Well, if you're going to set the standard based on an AHA hospital or a board certified surgeon, you're going to eliminate, you know, 90% of the good work that's going on out there. And they've been really hard on nonprofits in Colorado, for sure. You know, if they had their way, they would all just go. I mean, one of the big nonprofits in Colorado is an AHA hospital now. On Friday at 5 or 3, they boot all the animals out. They're not open for the weekend. Now, if your dog has parvo, they're booting it out. And if you find someone that takes it for, you know, less than $2,000 a night, maybe it lives, maybe, you know, I know at least 3 explorers, they booted out within 24 hours of a major surgery, and all 3 of those animals died, you know. So is that ethical? I don't know, you know, I mean, to me, it's not, but it comes back to money. You know, what you basically say, well, they didn't have the money, so therefore they're gone, but they just closed their doors and they're not open for a couple of days. And I don't understand, you know, we're not emphasizing humane treatment of these animals long term. It's interim, you know, and it's really taken a hell of a toll on the veterinarians in general, especially young veterinarians. Idealistic, you know, there's so many. I said we had no compassion in that profession until about the early 90s. 1989 was the first year we had more females in my class than males. You know, that was the first, that was when I graduated. It was the first class that had more females. I think with infusion of females into the profession, you know, somewhere along the line, they decided maybe leg hold traps are in fact cruel to animals, you know, but that was a fight to get that done, you know. So the old white males need to pass away, and we need a lot more young females pushing our profession towards the compassionate side of things. Not that there's not some of us males out there pushing too, but I'll be honest, I think the infusion of compassion came from the female side, not the male side.
So let's talk about food. You talked a little bit about, you know, the foods to avoid. So what are the foods for cats that you recommend for avoiding the crystals forming, especially with the fact that you understand that we've got feral cat feeders, cost is an issue. So do you have any potential recommendations what we can do for our feral cats?
It's a tough one because, you know, when I was in school, it was struvite crystals. That's all cats had, struvite crystals. That was it. It was simple. And CD worked great for that if they had it from Hills. Having said that, now you have struvite, you have oxalate, and you have mucus plugs. And we think the mucus plugs are coming from inflammation and probably allergy type issues. So once again, what are we breeding? Who's breeding what? You know, I don't know. You know, from a legal perspective, I got to be real careful about naming certain foods. But I can think of 4 or 5 right off the top of my head that I wouldn't feed to anything on this planet. And those are the ones that tend to be the lower cost. You know. I really do believe in more of a natural type diet. I like the grain-free diets for cats. Having said that, I know a couple grain-free diets that, in fact, still have crystal issues, you know, which is surprising. But for the most part, a good quality grain-free diet. And there's, you know, if you go into Petco or PetSmart and you say, look, I want to feed a food that's low in ash, you know, or promotes urinary tract health. What do you have available? You know, that's the way to do it. You know, part of the problem is in this country, if you can say made in America, but you may be getting your product from China or someplace else. So you don't know what's really mixed in with the grain and that kind of stuff. So wherever they put it together, there's a lot of kind of false advertising, and you know, in my opinion, out there. So you don't always know. And these companies, they buy each other up all the time, and they'll just change the formula, and you won't even know it happened. You know, so we have dropped several foods that we used to carry. We don't carry anymore because it took us a while to figure out that that's not the same food anymore. So it's you almost need to be online and, you know, have access to a computer and research that all the time. I mean, you can. There's people that are always looking into the foods and that kind of stuff and saying what's in them and what's not in them. But I think a good grain-free diet for cats is really important. It's a natural diet for them. You know, you think of what they eat. They, you know, eat hairy bags, you know, and feathery bags of animals. You know, I mean, birds and mice and things like that. You know, and naturally. So Obviously, we don't want the parasites and all that. We prefer them not to be out there eating birds. So, keep them well fed. Is my attitude.
How old was the youngest kitten or puppy that you've sterilized?
Probably about 3 weeks old. Yeah, 3 weeks. So it's tough. Much 5 weeks that's pretty easy. You get much under 5 weeks, it just gets to be hard. And there's this concept they have to be 2 pounds. That came out of a CSU study. Well, that was their limit. It was an arbitrary. Once again, it's an arbitrary limit. They just found 2 pounds was easier to do the surgery on and stuff like that. So you still get a lot of people saying, well, they have to be 2 pounds. Well, that's malarkey. It doesn't matter. It's the anesthesia. You tailor it down to the animal you're doing, and with some of the injectables we have, and certainly with the isoflurane, breathing in and breathing out, it's just not that hard to do much younger animals. And quite frankly, you don't even have to tie them off. You can just literally pull their uteruses out. They don't bleed. It's called the bloodless Spay. It goes back to the early 1900s. Dr. Mackey has lectured on that. So, they're really fast. You're looking at 1 stitch, 2 stitches to close them. And literally 2 hours later, they're running around playing with each other. They don't even know something happened. So I say 5 weeks is to me is just fine, and you have no problems whatsoever, and you have a much lower death rate and complication rate, in all honesty.
Let me see here. Do you have any awareness of states that are doing statewide legislation or legislative support that are actually making a difference? Sort of what are your opinions on these sort of statewide spay neuter campaigns that we're doing?
Well, I know in Colorado we have the license plate. The problem is the license plate stuff is geared through the CVMA, the Colorado Veterinary Medical Association. They don't like me, so I don't get anything. You don't do enough. I've done more space neuters in this state than anybody else, but yet I don't do enough. They gave a grant to a veterinarian out to a small town that was doing some really unethical stuff and was, charging, and he's getting full price, So what I find is too many times the state funded stuff goes through the veterinarian boards or whatever, and what they do is they basically subsidize veterinarians to get their full price. Like they're paying, they basically subsidize the full price or whatever the normal spay would be, or close to the full price. And to me, that's kind of not what that was designed for. If you really want to address overpopulation, we need to be getting that into the hands of the people doing the low cost stuff, So it's a two-edged sword. I'd rather have some of that money than not have it out there, because at least someone's thinking about doing spay neuter with it. Maybe they only do 20 feral cats instead of 200 for the same price, but it's better than nothing. But I keep emphasizing all the time, this is the problem I have with the no-kill movement, is that pie for humane treatment of animals is only so big. It's just so big. And if you have a little slither for spay neuter, if you can expand that sliver, we can do more work, But if we're fighting over the crumbs, which is so many of the groups fight over the crumbs, we can't see the forest for the trees, And I really do think society needs to be more informed about what's going on, and we need to be able to, push more buttons and say, look, we need to get to this. We have this problem over here. Why isn't it being addressed? And in many of the areas, there are no vets in the area. There are just no vets there. So who do you give the money to? You got to find people willing to do the mobile stuff. So it doesn't pay to be controversial sometimes. So if I had to do it over again, maybe I'd be a little nicer to people. But once again, when I first started, you were killing 24 million. I said, get out of my way. I'm going to do spay neuter, and come hell or high water, this is the only way we're going to change this. And I still believe that, there's no rationale to ever kill an animal because it was born. None whatsoever.
No, I'm with you 100%. We talked a little bit about the veterinary shortage. So now I'm going to talk about technicians and hiring that type of staff support. Are you feeling the pressure with regards to your support staff? And, how do you utilize your technicians in the practice? Are you very focused on doing veterinary tasks and letting the technicians do their technician tasks? Or do you find yourself sometimes crossing over and sort of doing a little bit of everything?
Well, we do cross over. The problem is it depends on what state you're in, and it's dictated by the state board, So technicians, my technicians are better at dentals than my doctors, plain and simple. But they can't do the dentals because legally they're not allowed to. In the old days they did, not anymore. On reservations, and Hector used to travel with me. He was one of my techs. He would do all the prepubertal neuters, on the small dogs. And I mean, I'd be doing the space and stuff, and he'd do those, and it was no big deal. He never had a problem. But legally, out the reservations, that's not legal, so he couldn't do it, I believe that we need spay neuter technicians, and we need to expand. On the human side, I've had 18 surgeries. And I think maybe twice the doctor that actually did the surgery closed me. It's usually someone else doing it, a nurse or somebody, a nurse practitioner. They have people that just do that. And it gets to be a gray area. Like if I'm gloved in, if a technician's, maybe I'm holding a leg and I want them to drill a pin for me, because I want to make sure the bone's properly aligned. So I don't think the board cares so much about that, because in the end, but, I just think there's especially with such a shortage of veterinarians, if the techs could do more legally, it would really take a lot of pressure off us, And the vet profession pretty much agrees with that. But then when it comes down to legislation, they don't vote for it because I think they're afraid of the competition, And I think the funny part is you can bring in veterinarians from Mexico that are not licensed in the state, and they can work on big pig farms in South Carolina and things like that, and not have to get a license because it's a private property kind of thing and it's a commercial operation. But you can't bring a vet that can do spay neuter, like a dog spay in 10 minutes that's top of the line. That would be illegal for Humane Society to do that. And my position is we need to push those boundaries, because in the end, like in Colorado, because animals are personal property, you can do surgery on your own animal. If you could get the anesthesia or your dog would let you, there's nothing illegal about you doing surgery on your own animal because it's personal property. It's like fixing your car. Now we can agree or disagree with how that's viewed, but that is the law. So, like if a Humane Society has animals, why can't the Humane Society hire a technician just to do the spay neuter prior to adoption versus a vet, if they're trained properly? Because they're personal animals, and maybe you sign that animal over to the individual technician for the day and they fix it, which is a real, you're driving a Mack truck through a small pinhole. And I'm sure that, some board would have issue with that. But, fight it in court, who knows, but do you want to spend your time fighting that stuff in court? But I just really do believe spay neuter technicians are the way to go. It would make a real difference. And that is the number one surgery we do across America, but most vets don't even like to do it. A big dog spay is a real bear for them, and they prefer to not do it. So, and if we're looking at Humane Society animals only that are owned by the Humane Organization, what difference does it make if a technician's doing it? Because they're not in competition with other veterinarians at all.
Yep. Just a last question, which is a clarification question around your position around euthanasia. Euthanasia is not a solution to control overpopulation, but euthanasia has a certain role, i.e. for a sick animal.
Yeah. And it comes back to quality of life, and I think I will euthanize for aggression. That's one of the biggest things I'll euthanize for. And I'll just give an example. We had a dog come in that had killed a dog, and my staff, it was friendly to people, and my staff and it was brought in to euthanize, and they were talked out of it. They left it with us to adopt. That dog ended up killing 2 more dogs before we euthanized it. So, and I was for euthanasia from the get-go because I didn't think we were going to change its personality. And it lived with the dog for 6 months, and then it saw a cat, got excited, and just turned and chomped the dog it was living with and killed it. So I think aggression, especially towards other smaller animals, unless you are absolutely sure where you're adopting that animal to, is not going to have exposure to other animals. And then you get into, you have a 14-year-old dog, with heart failure, and it's struggling to breathe. Do you put it on medications? You try to make it better. Is it worth adopting? And I don't know. Those are the gray areas. If you can give quality of life, but not all animals respond the same way, and not all of them are going to have good quality of life. So it does come back to that. And a lot of humane organizations say, they say they don't euthanize. Right? They'll say we only euthanize unhealthy, unadoptable animals. Well, define that. You know, in the old days, if it had torn ACL or CCL in the knee, because they didn't have the vet to do the surgery on the knee, they would euthanize and say, well, that wasn't adoptable because it had a problem, you know. To me, that's not a rationale to euthanize. But some chronic diseases, I don't spend a lot of time working with distemper puppies. You know, I think that most of them should be euthanized, especially if they're under, 12 weeks of age. You can spend thousands and thousands of dollars as a humane organization, and most of them are going to die anyway, you know. So parvo's another story. We have a very high parvo success rate. So, you know, we tend to, but the tiny ones the size of your hand, they just don't have a lot of reserves, and it's really tough to bring them through, you know. So you got to balance that out, and that's where I think the veterinarian comes in. You got to be able to balance that.
Lots of folks chiming in the comments about how their techs, they are, trying to empower their techs to do as much as they can, especially in the rural areas where vets are very busy with livestock, trying to utilize the techs in some way to help with getting neuters done. So everybody's just trying to be very creative about solutions to try and at least get that spay neuter first. I mean, it makes no sense to do a dental on a cat that's not spayed or neutered, right? So absolutely. At least that's the bedrock first and foremost. And I hate to say, kick the can down the street and we worry about the teeth later, but I do think that the spay neuter is the must-have first before some of those supplemental. I agree that they're both. So like in Massachusetts, once we got to the point where we had inundated with spay neuter, now the clinics have adjusted and are offering more full service work. But then when COVID hit and everything restructured and no one is taking in new clients, so the folks that have new pets are trying to get into these spay neuter clinics, they cut back their capacity on spay neuter because they offer these other services. And so now we have the shortages on spay neuter in the state. There's this, you're never going to put each other out of business, but you're going to be shifting due to the needs of the community. So flexibility is really the motto at the end of the day, I think.
Yeah, and once again, I think that's why techs could do more and make a real difference. I know for a fact one of the people on the state board here who knows the rules lets their techs pull teeth just because I know a doctor that worked there, and that's illegal as hell. You know, you can't do that legally. You know, so but people do it all the time, and what happens behind closed doors. I think there's a lot of technician work. You know, I'm pretty anal about it simply because I'm controversial and I'm, my head's up in the clouds all the time, so I don't feel like getting my head cut off. So, I really try to stick to the rules the best I can. But I realize once again, I'm on reservations, my techs do a lot more for me. And we don't have problems. That's the point. We know it works, and I just, the AVMA really needs to address this because I don't see this shortage change. I think people's attitudes, some of the students are more likely to end up in shelters, work and stuff like that, but there's still not enough of us when it comes down to it. There's still a shortage.
Right. Well, Dr. Jeff, I want to thank you so much. This was a fantastic presentation. What a great way to start off our Saturday. I really appreciate you waking up early to join us this morning. Thank you so very much. And if folks are interested, plannedpethoodinternational.org. That is his organization. Some folks were asking questions about like resources off the slides. Just email Dr. Jeff directly, and if he has the resources, I'm sure he'll share. But this was great. So thank you very, very much. We are